Connect to a world of learning.
'21st century China is modernizing at breakneck speed. For the last century or so, it seemed that China was merely trying to catch up with standards of science and technology set by the West.
But if you take the longer view, if your perspective is not a few hundred years, but a few thousand years, by any measure it was China that was at the vanguard of science and technology. In fact, it turns out that many Western inventions were not inventions at all, but borrowings from China. If we want to explain the blossoming of knowledge in the West, it pays to look east, to what the Chinese knew.
Modern China's distinctive identity has evolved over thousands of years. It is one of the oldest and most successful civilizations, a society whose strength depended on science and technology. In fact, from 600 to 1500 AD, China was the most technologically advanced society on Earth. Like all budding cultures, the Chinese gathered knowledge through careful observation and experimentation. They watched the endless cycles of the sun, moon and stars, and marveled at the force of nature. Over millennia, their understanding of the elements grew, and the Chinese found ways to harness the powers of earth, metal, wood, water and fire.
Normally we think of fire as a destructive element, but it can also be a force for creation.
Early Chinese alchemists believed the secret to eternal life and powerful medicines lay in combining just the right ingredients over a fire. Some recipes even called for heating concoctions up to a year. Around 300 AD, the alchemists began to create elixirs of sulfur, saltpeter and various plants. It took another 700 years of singed beards and charred houses before researchers learned to add pure charcoal to sulfur and saltpeter. Blending the three made what they called huo yao, the fire drug. By sheer coincidence, they discovered gunpowder. The new invention created bright sparks, and so the Chinese used it for celebration. They invented the world's first fireworks. After fireworks, it didn't take long for gunpowder to find its new destiny: war. For thousands of years, arrows were the primary weapon in Chinese warfare. But around 1150 AD, during the Song dynasty, someone came up with the idea to tie a bamboo tube packed with gunpowder to the arrow and add a fuse. Next, they attached a tiny iron weight near the feathers to tilt the arrowhead up for a longer flight. It was the world's first rocket. But the idea was in its infancy. Over the next 2 centuries, weapons designers found ways to maximize the rocket's potential. To make it more powerful, they drilled holes straight through the center of the gunpowder so that the powder burnt evenly and shot the gas backward, causing the arrow to streak directly forward. Then they constricted the opening at the back, raising the pressure inside the tube to create even more thrust. This type of rocket had a range of up to 10 football fields. But firing one rocket at a time is not very effective. So they developed a multiple rocket launcher. These rockets used a non-explosive gunpowder which simply propelled the arrows forward. Although they didn't explode, they did enough to stun and amaze the Emperor's enemies. So you can thank the Chinese for your 4th of July light show. The Chinese also found inspiration in another basic element: water. The early Chinese reaped the benefits of water by rerouting rivers and creating vast systems of canals. Water was not only used for practical purposes, it also reflected the way the Chinese viewed the earth. They even saw water when they looked to the heavens above. For thousands of years, Chinese astronomers studied the stars and planets flowing in their endless course across the sky, like the path of some unfathomable river. They seem to run their course around one star, the North Star. Because the North Star's position remained constant, the Chinese used it to map the location of every other star in the sky. This method of positioning stars is called the equatorial system, and the Chinese have been using it for about 2,000 years, nearly 2 millennia before the West. This is an equatorially mounted instrument called an armillary sphere, used to measure positions of the Moon and planets. It is housed at the National Astronomical Instrument Museum in Beijing.
This is where modern astronomy begins. For the system used here, of the equatorial armillary, is the same system adopted by Western astronomers and which is still used today in modern observatories. The difference being, of course, is that we have a great big whacking telescope with which to see the stars. But in its day, this was state-of-the-art.
The armillary is lined up with the North Star. Chinese astronomers pinpointed stars with the sighting tube and then catalogued their location by counting the markings on the rotating rings. The first equatorial armillaries were built around the 1st century AD, but 1,200 years later, Chinese astronomers were using it to predict the positions of the heavenly bodies to within a 20th of a degree. Not bad for the naked eye. The ancient Chinese believed the stars held the secrets to their destinies. The positions of the heavenly bodies foretold auspicious times for imperial marriages, births, and wars. The imperial stargazers carefully studied the sky for signs and along the way made many astronomical discoveries. Like this supernova that formed the Crab Nebula in 1054 AD. In fact, the Chinese were the very first people in history to recognize and record supernovae. They called them guest stars because they shone brightly for a few weeks and disappeared. Modern astronomers learned from these supernova records about the births of certain nebulae. But for the Chinese, events like supernovae, eclipses and famines were sent as warnings from heaven that the imperial family was not ruling well. Emperors sought to connect events on Earth with those in the heavens. Failed crops or famine could mean the end of a dynasty, but so could unpredicted eclipses. The emperor relied on his astronomers and astrologers to predict heavenly events to help him avoid earthly disasters. The imperial court became fertile breeding ground for new ideas and technology. This is Kaifeng City, 400 miles south of Beijing. Around 960 AD, one of China's golden ages blossomed here into the Song dynasty, a 300-year period ripe with innovation. Kaifeng was the dynasty's first capital. This city of nearly 4.5 million people has been an important center of Chinese civilization for about 3,000 years. But even today, the city retains many features specific to the Song dynasty's culture. At 7 o'clock each night, the city's food market sets up in a mad rush, each vendor hoping to be the first to dish up his wares. This tradition of eating out began during the Song dynasty, when expanding commerce brought money and people to the capital. The world's first restaurants sprung up, and food like dumplings and noodles became widely available to the masses for a small price. The architecture in Kaifeng's new historic district is based on the style of the Song capital. This temple lies at the northern end of the city's historic district. It was built in honor of emperors who ruled Kaifeng during its imperial days. The location was chosen because buried far below this building are the ruins of the Song imperial palace. This is a model of the ancient palace grounds. Hidden among the impressive walls and buildings is one of mankind's greatest inventions. A 30-foot tower the inventor called a cosmic engine, the world's first mechanical clock.
This scene is a monument to one of the greatest breakthroughs of intellectual history. The fellow on my left here, Su Song, was a mathematician, astronomer, and all-round genius who is explaining his invention, a mechanical water clock, to the Emperor Chao Shu in the year 1092.
Early Chinese astronomers often equated the heavens with water, since stars seemed to drift across the night sky like a giant flowing river. They frequently used water to drive simple machines, which mimicked the motion of the stars. The problem they faced was keeping the mechanism operating at a precise rate. Su Sung solved that problem with a mechanism which today is known as a mechanical escapement. Inside Su Sung's armillary clock, a stream of water turned a large wheel equipped with cups. As the measured weight of water forced one cup down, the wheel moved forward one cog. A series of weights and locks kept it from recoiling or from moving forward too quickly. This mechanical escapement captured time in precise increments. A chain drive, another Chinese invention, rotated the armillary at the top. One complete rotation for each day, replicating the movement of the stars. Although this machine was primarily used as an astronomical showpiece, its mechanical escapement was the foundation of modern mechanical clocks. In a few hundred years, China would drop this technology while the West, much later, went on to create clocks using weights and springs instead of water to drive the escapement. For nearly 35 centuries, the Chinese have kept carefully dated, detailed and reliable records. This is Jinhua village in central China. It is in this bucolic atmosphere that I find remnants of another ancient Chinese technology that dates from the 2nd century BC. Paper. Villagers here in Jinhua earn their living by making paper the traditional way, sheet by sheet. Gathering the material they use to make paper is as simple as going into the backyard. The villagers use bamboo, which grows in abundance on these mountainsides. Workers cut the bamboo down, dry it, and chop it into chips. Then they steam the chips until they're crumbly and moist. Next, the bamboo is soaked in bleach and ground into a thick mush. Once the mush is white, they grind it again into liquid pulp, perfect for paper. 3 centuries ago, the process took 100 days. Now, it takes a week. Once they've suspended the pulp in a vat of water, they use screens to gather a thin layer and then lay the new paper out to drain with one sweeping, elegant motion. This family has been making paper here for 14 generations, nearly 300 years. In the beginning, paper wasn't anywhere near as thin as these sheets drying on the wall. In fact, people used the earliest paper to make blankets and clothing accessories. Eventually, the Chinese refined the process and created a smooth, thin material, ideal for writing. 1,000 years later, long before the West had even started making paper, the Chinese were already working on a new idea, the printed word. Printing was an idea that flourished around 1000 AD, once again during the Song dynasty. From then on, information could be easily duplicated and distributed.
This is Qingming Riverside Park in Kaifeng. If you can look beyond the tourists with their video cameras and their cell phones, every detail in this park, the architecture and the costumes, is an exact replica of what life was like here in the 11th century.
I'm here because scattered throughout this park are hints of China's technological past, at a time when Kaifeng was a lively centre of trade and commerce. And the reason why this park is so authentic is because it was modelled after a 16-foot-long scroll by artist Zhang Zeduan. He captured a snapshot of ancient Kaifeng during his lifetime, detailing